the opportunity to chat about social media and questions for you. But before we do that, maybe you wouldn't mind just telling the audience a little bit more about yourself and what path brought you to your current role as US CMO.
Yep. So I am the CMO for Nissan North America and with specific responsibilities for the US. I've actually been in automotive my entire career. I love cars and I love marketing. So it's been the perfect career for me. I started out consulting for Mercedes-Benz, and then I transitioned to agency side, and I led agency teams at BMW, and then the global agency team for Volvo, which took me to Amsterdam, which is where the global agency team was headquartered. From there, I then had to put away my agency shoes. I had to hang up my agency shoes, and I was the director of marketing, my first client side role for Infiniti, which is part of the Nissan family and is the luxury brand for Nissan. So I was the head of marketing in the US for Infiniti. From there, I then took a role based out of Japan, which is where our global headquarters are. And I was the number 2 in global marketing, working for the global CMO. So spent 2 years in Japan, learned a ton, and then came back in April of 2019 as the US CMO.
Wow, that's quite a trajectory, and I love the international experience. I'm sure that's brought so much value to you as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Great. So I'll go ahead and then dive right into the questions. I thought it might be timely to jump right into sort of the reality of where we are today, knowing that 2020 has been one for the ages with the global pandemic, social unrest, the upcoming election, and so relevant to social, right? So
yeah,
social being at sort of that intersection between brands and their consumers and seeing such fast sort of behavior change. So curious about how Nissan has been thinking about listening to and studying these sort of fast changing consumer behaviors over
time. And I think that was the key part of it. It's really listening and tracking where the consumer behavior sentiment was. And I was listening in on the session before us, and the joke about I got to the end of Netflix and that comment. And I feel like, things are changing so rapidly. Where we were at the beginning of March was very different 2 weeks in, and then now fast forward a full 6 months. And we've gone through kind of 3 or 4 different full life cycles of consumer behavior. For us, the most important thing right out of the gate, in kind of the middle of March, right as the lockdowns and the quarantines were starting to happen, was to really listen to consumers. And social media was the fastest way for us to do that, to understand what they were looking for from us as a brand. What were they needing? Because the reality is that in the automotive industry, things just completely collapsed overnight. And dealerships were not, they were not considered essential services outside of the service bays. If you needed to have maintenance work done on your car. So people weren't actually able to go. And I think it just overnight, things really changed. We had about 30% of our dealer network was closed. And so we had to immediately shift how we were thinking. We had grand campaign plans. We were, one of the corporate partners for NCAA. We had all of this content, and so much of it was social, and we had to completely stop that overnight. And I think the biggest thing was really listening in and using our social listening tools to understand what are people's needs, what are they interested in. And we set out at the very, in June, right at the very, or sorry, it's been a while.
Earlier
we
than
set
that.
out we set out in March and really started to focus on what are the support tools? What do people need right now? And then it was about building community. And how can we build community? How can we tap into what are things that people need? How can we support them, whether it's on the vehicle side or just even breaking from boredom? I think you started to see, and I think all of us are feeling it, is, how can we shift out of this, what seemed kind of, interesting at first and working from home, and I can adjust to this, to all of the pressure that started to happen. Consumers are feeling that. They're feeling that with their families. They're feeling that with having, with working from home. They're feeling with that and balancing all of it together in the middle of a massive health scare. And so it was really tapping into listening to that through social media and then starting to build content around it. And I think what was interesting is that, again, we had, major sports platforms that was there to communicate our message that wasn't available anymore. And we shifted all of our focus into social media, really aligning around this strategy and then just building content around it. And it's something that we're still doing and evolving it over, that we've evolved over the last several months.
That's interesting. Were there any sort of major acts or initiatives that Nissan did sort of coming out of that listening and that research?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the biggest thing was really understanding how people what they're needing from their vehicles. And so the first thing is, if you're in the market, and not many people were because of the lockdown, how could we make that process easier for you, knowing that there was health scares and, fear of leaving your house, and then also the economic concerns. So, there were certain, kind of offers that were in place for consumers that were in the market. There was also what happened if you were a frontline worker and you needed your car serviced, and how can we support you, and how can we do drop off and delivery, those types of things. And it's really understanding and at a grassroots level, we were starting to do that. I think the other thing too, and fast forward a few weeks, once things started to open back up, there was still the concern, obviously, with health and safety. And how do we do that in an environment that is built to be physical, which is a dealership? And so based on what we heard in social media, we knew people were afraid to leave their homes, or they didn't want to go and do a physical shopping experience. So how can we start to bring a lot of those online shopping tools to them so they can do that in the comfort of their own home on the website? So we actually launched this initiative in May called Shop at Home, where it was about organizing and creating these shopping tools to allow people to do as much shopping behavior as they could up to the point of transaction, and then have our dealers pick up with their online transaction tools. And so, I think the interesting thing is online shopping isn't a new thing by any means, but it is not as prevalent in automotive. And we had already had these plans were already in place, but it was really about accelerating those. And something that maybe a project was 6 months or a year out, we accelerated that to be, a matter of weeks. And those insights really came from listening in and seeing how people were responding and using those tools from social media.
Yeah, it sounds like it was almost an impetus for some level of digital transformation, which I think a lot of companies are seeing.
Yeah, 100%. And I've been in automotive my entire career. I am a digital native, so I was ready for this. And there were plans in place, but it really it was a catalyst to accelerate all of that. And the reality is that consumer behavior isn't going to revert back to where we were 100%. People are going to want, and they already did, and now we have tools in place for them to do all of this activity online if they're not comfortable going to the dealership. If you want to go, obviously dealerships are open again. You can still shop that way, but this allows for a separate path, and it's based on how consumers want to shop, not how we dictate they should shop, which I think is the most important and probably the biggest shift, actually.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're speaking to sort of building this customer experience. I'm so interested about sort of brand building and how all the events of 2020 have potentially pushed Nissan into thinking more about sort of brand purpose, or double downing on brand purpose. Would you mind sort of speaking a little bit to that?
Sure. And we started down the path of brand purpose at the very beginning. It kind of towards the end of 2019, at the very beginning of the year. So we actually had this in place, and it was about giving credibility to innovation and excitement for everyone, which is, that is, our vision. But it was really about giving that credibility. And typically what you do is you align that with product and what your product launches are going to be. And I think with COVID, product launches we weren't trying to sell cars anymore, which was a very uncomfortable thing. No, when you've been doing that for so long and an entire organization has been doing that. And we really reoriented around this brand purpose and how can we use this time when it's not about what we call in automotive butts and seats, when how do we reorient about how do we drive innovation and excitement for everyone? And what does that mean even when you can't get in your car? What happens when you're in the car, but also what happens when you can't actually drive because of you're in lockdown. And so that's where we started, there's how do we support, how do we build communities? And then also this breaking from boredom. And it was around how you can use your car as your own office, if you're wanting to get away from your family, if you need just a little bit of quiet time, there's that piece of it. How do you disinfect your car? And, how do you actually make sure that that is a healthy and safe place? We just launched some content we launched some content about superheroes and really honoring frontline workers. We also talked about in social media and created some content and partnered with Randy Newman actually on a track. And it was about the role of cars during the lockdown and how you see these lines of cars for graduations and weddings and grandmothers kissing their newborn grandbabies and things like that, and kind of honoring that. And I think it's a way to acknowledge what's going on, but to also give people a little bit of levity and some hope, which I think is important. And I think in our corporate communications team just yesterday, they also launched, how do you keep your pet safe when they're in the car and things like that. So I think there's just, it's a little bit of product. It's a little bit of, information. And then, during, kind of the lockdown, it was about, breaking from boredom, but all of it was really rooted in innovation and excitement for everyone. So how can everyone get the most out of their car during this lockdown?
And in this time of sort of social unrest, I'm curious if all the sort of conversations happening surrounding Black Lives Matter, we just had Pride Month, if that's sort of an understanding that increasingly consumers want to buy brands with sort of aligned values and sort of shared purpose. Curious if that swell of conversation in social media has caused some important sort of conversations in the senior rooms of Nissan.
I mean, absolutely. I think it's how could it not? And I think it was very important for that to happen. And I know from our experience at Nissan, it has absolutely been a part of those conversations at a very senior level. And it has been a part of something that everyone has now, pledged a commitment to try to advance and try to be better at this. And so I think, and even when we think about social media, you think about, whether it's the boycott or Blackout Tuesday, I think, again, it goes back to the brand purpose. And for Nissan, we are a very diverse company. I think we were actually the most diverse Japanese company when we were founded at the time. We had a very diverse board. So it's in our DNA, it's in our consumer base, and it's something that we embrace and we love that about our brand. And I think it's just making sure that we have a constant effort and commitment to supporting every person that the brand comes into contact with. And that's what we've tried to do. I think, specific to Black Lives Matter, we actually were partners with BET, and there was the BET Awards, which was happening, right as social unrest was going on. And we were thinking about what are ways for us to actually show action. And again, and looking what's going on in social media, what are the conversations that people are having? How are people talking about Black Lives Matter? How are they talking about diversity inclusion? And I think the biggest thing that came out was really, it's about showing action, and it's about showing meaningful action, and that can be very large or it can be, local or grassroots. And what we did with our BET partnership is that we actually just said, now is not the time to be advertising a product. And again, it's not the moment. During this award show and during where the conversation is going to be universally around supporting Black Lives Matter, it was really going to be about how do we support that and how do we show our support to the community. And so we actually donated our airtime to Black Girls Code, which is an organization that we had worked with in the past that provides education and schooling for girls that are interested in STEM. And obviously we're a huge proponent and a huge organization that's part of STEM. And we thought, and we have worked together in the past. So we actually donated our time, our airtime. We also donated our personal time, which I think is actually even more important as well, and helping them put together this campaign, this national campaign. And I think it's, that for us, and we will continue to support the Black community. But it was really about showing those actions and kind of using that moment in time to support that, both through the broadcast as well as in social media.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. It's clear that Nissan didn't view it as sort of an opportunistic moment. Nissan wanted to show its authentic commitment by giving up that airtime. How wonderful.
Yeah, thanks.
And so I guess if we step out of 2020 for a moment, and
what does that look like? It's like roses, everything's light and airy.
Exactly. We'll all continue to dream of this moment when we're out of 2020. But social, I think for both of us, having worked in social for so long, we've seen it change over the last a decade and beyond. I remember the MySpace days, but I was just curious if you might highlight some of the key changes you've seen, and then what are sort of key implications for brands at large today.
Yeah, I think probably, starting at the beginning, it was all about fans, right? And it was who could get the most fans and that type of thing. I think, very quickly, I think one of the pivotal moments was actually when paid social media came into play. And once the algorithm started to be less friendly towards brand and organic, and it became much more about paid. And so I think you started to see a very different shift, and it became less about, how many fans do you have, which I feel like we don't even refer to anymore. And it became much more about engagement. How are you, we have what we call key buying actions. So how are you driving key buying actions? What does your sentiment look like? How are the conversations that are taking place in social media? And so I feel like the role of it has changed very much from just supporting an enthusiast community to you're supporting an enthusiast community. And I don't think that will ever go away. But you're also driving business and driving the brand on top of that and reaching people that may not be familiar with your brand, which I think is actually what's really exciting, is that, through paid, you're able to reach people that may not have considered you before. The use of influencers definitely can serve that purpose. And so I think that's one of the biggest things. I think, one of the most successful, I guess, social media campaigns that I was a part of was actually at BMW. And I think the important piece of it was, it was in 2011, and BMW was a part of the Super Bowl. So they were part of the Super Bowl. And what we wanted to do is really show how you could use Super Bowl, but show how you could use social media to drive business objectives. And so there was a campaign that was about the X3 at the time, and it was about all these different configurations, and there was an Easter egg in the spot, and kind of all of these things. And the beauty of it was that, the car sold out for, 2 to 3 months, after the Super Bowl campaign ran. And that to me really showed the impact of the platforms and of the channels. And then it's just been building on since then. And I think, now we don't do anything that doesn't have a social component that is either leading or a very fast follow as part of it. But in most cases, it's always leading.
Yeah, that's interesting, because as socials become more pay to play and not sort of the free channel that it was previously, I think some sort of see that as a prohibitor for social, but it actually presented an enormous opportunity for brands to reach and influence people that weren't currently following them, exactly as you said.
Yeah. And I think more and more, I think that this is how, especially when you think about Generation Z, I think that's how they're going to be discovering brands, because it's not going to be on, kind of network TV. It's not going to be in the primetime shows, most likely. I think this is how people will be discovering brands. And if you think about it, the level of social media is, has surpassed the level of network TV. And so you get that scale, but you also get that highly targeted opportunity as well, which is really interesting and important when you think about, efficiency of spend as an example.
Yeah. And so I guess you're speaking to the overall sort of role of social in Nissan sort of marketing mix. I'm curious, do you see it as a brand building sort of tool, a lead generation tool, or it sounds like perhaps it's both, and how are you finding that the balance between those?
Yeah, for us, it's both. I think what we're trying to do is really evolve. I think as a brand, we've been very kind of sales oriented historically. Over the last year or so, we've been trying to transition into very much a brand led. So I think we are trying to do both. I think we will always lead with brand, but it's going to be brand with purpose. And it's going to be either to excite our owners, excite our fans, excite the community, or it's going to be to introduce Nissan to people who aren't familiar, or introduce Nissan in a way that maybe they haven't seen before. So for us, it's both. And I think when we look at how do we differentiate those two things, I think we look at it's audience based. And so we look at who are people that are going to be in market in the next 30 days. And that's going to be a very different use of social media and the targeting and what that messaging is going to be. And then when you're looking at people that are going to be in market to buy a car, if it's 60 days to 6 months out, that's a slightly different message, and that'll be a little bit more branded. And then if it's something if they're 6 months out or more from buying a car, very much branded. So we actually let the audience and where they are in their car shopping process help drive what type of messaging they have. But I think strategically, when we look at social media, we look at it first as brand building and then a very fast follow in business driving.
It sounds like you're almost building sort of audience pools and
yes,
creating sort of tailored journeys and experiences. And
yep, and 100%, that's exactly what we do. And we do that actually by model. So we have 21 models that we support in our portfolio, and we do that across our entire portfolio.
It's a pretty sophisticated segmentation strategy.
Yes, it is. There's a lot of audience segmentation work that we do. But I think I think that's what social media has kind of brought to the table. These platforms, and you can argue, kind of the pros and cons of them all day, any day. But the reality is that we are able to understand so much more about consumers and where they are in the shopping process and what their interests are. And I think that we have used that data to enable a much more relevant message, as opposed to just kind of, throwing out a lease offer to every single person that we can possibly find, whether or not that's relevant to them and whether or not even that model is relevant to them. And I think that's what's exciting. And that's what social media and these platforms have started to enable us to do.
And because I think about different platforms, right? And I guess with such a sophisticated segmentation strategy with Facebook and Instagram, the targeting capabilities, the paid capabilities are more advanced. With the sort of newer channels, less so. How do you find that sort of channel strategy and that right balance of going to where your consumers are, but also being where the tools are most sophisticated?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a balance. And I think, I think obviously with Facebook and Instagram, and hopefully in the near future, WhatsApp, we are, that audience segmentation tool is the same, and it is highly, it is very advanced. I think the same thing for YouTube, if you're considering that YouTube is social media and, it's a content channel, but you can argue it one way or the other.
For sure.
So I think obviously they have a lot of segmentation tools. I think and Twitter is the same. And so I think when you look at Twitter plays a little bit of a different role in that when you think about the channel is really about kind of what is that news, what's really, I think they call it what's happening now. And so it's how can you be in that real-time content and how can we be a part of that discussion? And so the content strategy there is very different than what we would have on Instagram or Facebook. And then when you think about Snapchat, that's going to be, very much about the engagement. How can you empower an experience? And then, in discussions with TikTok, depending on what happens with TikTok, it would be very similar. So how can we empower an experience there? And what is the role of brands? I think, with Snap, and when I was at Infinity, we were doing kind of one of the first filters with one of our vehicle launches. And so I think there are just really interesting ways that you can be a brand without it feeling so I'm a brand, I'm in your face type advertising, which is nice.
And I guess adapting sort of the measurement strategy to the platform strength. So, when you went into Snap with Infinity, I'm sure you had had to decide what success would look like. So curious if you might just talk a little bit to how you think about measuring success in social at Nissan.
Yeah, I mean, measurement and success, it definitely is very specific to the channel. And I think one of the frustrating things, as a marketer and as an advertiser, is that the walled gardens, there are different measurement tools. There are different ways that they measure things. So sometimes it's hard to do comparisons against the platforms, but obviously we try. Mm-hmm. I think for us, there are sometimes we will be doing campaigns where it is about engagement. Other times it will be about what those key buying actions are, or how can we drive that. If we're doing something that is a little bit more introduction or reveal, it's going to be about, just kind of, the overall, what is our reach on it? So it actually depends very much by campaign. I think when we're looking at more of our key buying action or business driving campaigns, we even look down to, how is it converting to sale? And so we try not to apply just one size fits all, because I don't think that's realistic, because, you're going to be trying to communicate different things, especially when you're trying to be much more targeted based on, where consumers are in the shopping process. But, it is important to be able to assess the different tools against each other. But I think we have to be pragmatic about not thinking that everything is going to be about conversion driving, as well as not everything is going to be just about pure reach, and be, really clear about that going into the campaign, because at the end of the day, part of my role is always going to be to defend and justify why we did what we did and why we spent what we spent. And so setting those parameters up front before we actually get into the campaign is really important. And then obviously the tracking part of it.
And you're at your level to be bringing that depth of understanding about the strengths of each of the channels, and you're really tailoring everything to the specific social channel is just so great to hear.
Yeah, it's I guess MySpace was maybe the first one, but I just, what I really like about social media as both a user of it as well as, a CMO, is that I like that it's basically just kind of, it's formalized just what was normal human behavior. Human behavior is I'm looking for something new. Who is a subject matter expert, and how can I get some details on it, before I actually go and purchase it, or before I, do this. And I think that was natural behavior already. It was phone calls and letters, pigeons, emails. And then it became about social media. And then that reach became so large. And you can get so much feedback, and it all became real time. And what I really like about it is I like that it's really formalized that normal natural behavior.
Yeah, you can always just use the filter of would I engage with this, or there's just a level of like practicality.
Yeah. And who doesn't love a good meme? I mean, who doesn't love that?
So much. I just have one. We're getting some questions from the audience, which is great. One more before I pivot there is about, and you mentioned it throughout this conversation, is the importance of your dealer network. And even if, digital transformation and Nissan, I imagine it sort of caused something similar in your dealer partners, but curious how you're partnering with them for social media efforts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. And I think it's interesting. I just had a meeting with our dealer board yesterday, and we were getting them up to speed, and they were like, this, social media is our priority. And I realized, like, the conversations are working. everyone's seeing the power. And the reason that they're seeing the power is that when the pandemic hit and we're starting to get into a little bit more of the recovery phase, we were realizing that social media could be a great platform for the dealers to talk about what they were doing in their stores and how they were going to be keeping consumers, safety and health was top priority. And so we worked with Facebook and we started to set up this pilot program of live streams. And basically, we worked with a few of our dealers across the country. And it was really about they were shooting content themselves in the dealership. It could be with product or not, but it was really just about what they're doing. And it started to take off. It really took off. And so we had 5 dealers that were starting it. They had over 100 videos. There were over 100,000 views just in a very short amount of time. And we started to roll that out. And I think what was interesting, and I was having this discussion with our dealer board, is that, one of the dealers had, almost 200 people tuning into the live stream. And while that number may not seem like it's huge, that is the equivalent of 200 people walking through the showroom at that second.
It never happens.
And exactly. And I think, and I was talking to the board, I was like, when was the last time 200 people walked through your showroom all at the same time? And it was, this light bulb went off, and then it was just, they understood that this is the new traffic. And that's why we're rolling it out. But I think, platforms like that, we also talked about how you can use WebEx or Zoom to do transactions. You can do FaceTimes, obviously safe. You have to make sure it's hands-free if you're wanting to do test drives and things like that. But there's so many of these tools that are available that provide convenience for consumers and are a way to engage with consumers that they don't necessarily have to come into the showroom anymore. And I think that's what's been really interesting. And they're really embracing it, and they're having a lot of fun with the content. Actually, it's been an employee motivation piece of it, which I thought was really interesting and definitely an added benefit that we didn't necessarily consider when we first were talking about it.
Perfect, thanks. So I'll pivot to these questions.
Okay.
I have 5 rapid fire questions for you. With just quick responses, but maybe for the audience, you could tell us your favorite social media channel for personal use.
For personal use, I love Instagram. I just love it. It's visual, it's quick. I love stories. But yeah, I like the visual. I love the visual one. Yeah, exactly. It's perfect for my ADD, probably.
Favorite social media channel for Nissan?
I also like, this is probably too, I also like Instagram because again, it's these short stories and short visual ways. I also like YouTube because again, if you consider YouTube a social channel, I like that because you're able to go into a little bit more detail depending on if people are looking for that. So I like that you can have a little bit longer form content.
And tap into the power of search. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And who doesn't love that?
Totally. What is the most effective social media channel for Nissan?
I would say the most effective is Facebook. So Facebook would be the most effective channel for Nissan.
And do you have a favorite TikTok trend?
TikTok is, when I first got into TikTok, it was like I got sucked into a black hole, and it was, 2 hours later, I'm just like,
Haven't we all?
I love the Taylor Swift. I love the Marry Me piece of it. What I love about it is I love the creativity. It's just fun. And I think that's why it's really taken off, especially now, because it's just a good time. And people are having fun and they're dancing. So I think the Taylor Swift is the favorite one. I also just I like how people are getting creative with the transition. So I know that it's in, several of them. I think the WAP trend is hilarious. People are adopting that. So I just all of it. I love all of it.
I guess the topic of the session is positivity in social media. Maybe we should have talked about TikTok or knowing it's a
Are we allowed to?
Yeah, that's true. And then do you have a favorite Instagram page, whether it's an influencer?
So there are quite a few. I love Jen Atkin, who is a hairstylist, and she owns the brand. She owns The Way, which is a hair care brand. I love how she is combined, she's the founder of it. So I like how she's kind of curated things for herself personally, but then also how she ties that into the brand. And I appreciate the brand consistency and the brand purpose that she has on that. And then I think for influencers, I really like Melissa Wood Health. I think she's empowering. I think she's provided a lot of ways for us to keep healthy during this time. So that's another good one. And then Brandon Collinsworth, I think I'm getting that one right. For just if you want to kind of stay on top of what's going on when it comes to social justice, I think that one's good. And then the last one, maybe I have too many, but the other one that I really started liking is this one called So You Want to Know About. And it's just these little quick hits of like just kind of top line things that are, that go into deep onto different issues or situations that are going on in culture in the community.
I took note of it. I'm going to have to check it out.
It's a good one. It's a really good one.
Well, thanks for answering those. We have some really fantastic questions sort of coming in from the audience. Where there's someone asking around podcasts and if that's a part of Nissan's marketing mix.
It is. Yeah, it definitely is. And I think it's, we're starting to get into that more and more, especially when you think about terrestrial radio has obviously changed over the last several months. So podcast has become a much more important part of our mix. We have some launches that are coming up that we're going to have, their podcast will be they'll have a more prominent role in it. But again, I think it's that switch from terrestrial radio really went into streaming, as the pandemic has been hitting, and we've seen that trend continue.
Yeah, speaking of a place where behaviors have changed, because once you remove the commute,
Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's interesting about podcasts, in that it's a very mobile format. I think you can take it on a run. You can play it in your car. We have Nissan Connect, so obviously you can play that once you get into the car, which is wonderful. And that's what I think people are looking for. They're wanting these really convenient and mobile formats so they can listen to content. And I think, from our standpoint, we can align our brand with certain types of content, depending on what it is that we're wanting to communicate.
The next one is, how are you planning with the Titans and Nissan Stadium to leverage your sponsorship assets in this context?
So, and that we've had a great relationship with the Titans, and obviously it's a very different environment now when you have a big stadium sponsorship. I think we've been working with them on, we haven't had any activity over the past 6 months. How can we work together to kind of co-promote some of the things? So actually the Titans came in and really promoted a lot of the work that we were doing within the community, some of the things that we're doing at a brand standpoint. So that was very helpful. And then we've been working in lockstep with them as the season starts to open, and what does that look like? And I think that's been, we're in a long-term, relationship with them. We love working with the Titans. And I think it's, how do we make a stadium sponsorship work given the current time frame? And I think we've come to some really good solutions about what does that look like outside of the physical stadium?
Yeah, as someone that's such an expert in social, I guess you're used to change, you're used to pivoting, and
it's
part
almost
of the fun of the job. Yeah,
it's whiplash, and it's been whiplash inducing lately. But yeah, I think we have to, and I think that's the other thing. And I'm sure every discussion that I've either participated in or watched it, we've all been, and there's a Slack channel for CMOs that we're all kind of on. What we're all talking about just the rate of change, and how, the days of taking 6 months to do a campaign, they just don't exist anymore. And there's something that's traumatizing about that, but there's also something that's very freeing. And I think it's been freeing to be able to break through and when able to break through when it comes to speed to market. And I think social has been what has enabled that, because it is something where you can do, content doesn't have to be, so perfect. It needs to be engaging. It needs to deliver on what the objective is. But it's something that you can get out and you can have that conversation with the community. And that's the most important part.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's been the disruptor of the industry. In a lot of ways, it's been the impetus that's sort of driving change and the pull toward agility.
Yep.
This question's about your personal leadership style and how it's changed over the last couple months? And then have you been able to develop more personal relationships with your colleagues and partners?
Yeah, that is an awesome question. I would say over the last few months, I think that there is, I'm probably going to be a little bit too transparent in this, but I think, when the pandemic first hit, there's kind of this moment where it's like, oh shit, what's happening?
Yeah.
And, and then all of a sudden you just go into, kind of beast mode. And it was just like, this is what we need to do. And I think it was almost like, you can't wait. And I think I definitely kind of, I became, I mean, always proactive, but it just became about like, we're not waiting. We're not waiting for the green light. We are just going. And, we're going to keep going. I'm going to, keep, the necessary stakeholders in the loop, but we are going. We do not want to, we don't want to like lose any ground in this moment. So I would just say, the proactiveness has been there. And I think the personal relationships, that's been what's been really interesting. And that I would say, yes, I personally, and I know my team is as well, I think we're all struggling with the Zoom fatigue. And, there's just something that's very taxing about that. But I also think it has been a way for us to connect with people and see each other's homes and children and pets and a little bit more of daily lives. And I think, even, kind of as the Black Lives Matter protest started in June, it's, checking in with different team members and kind of understanding what they're going through and talking to them. And so I would say yes. And I would say in my peers, the peers at my level, even, I think we've become very close because we've just kind of been in this, this pressure cooker and really trying to really react quickly. And it's definitely bonded us. It's bonded at my level, and it's bonded me with my team, I think.
Yeah, I think even how you open that saying, it's that vulnerability, I think, is actually more and more expected of leaders, and 2020 has I think pushed a lot of people into that, into sort of showing that vulnerability, which is great.
Yeah.
And perhaps one final question. We only have 2 minutes left. This person's asked, do you have any predictions for marketing in general, or perhaps specific to the automotive category?
I think for marketing in general, I think probably the biggest trend is I think this sounds a little, I would say the use of influencers, I think will probably be one of the biggest ones. Mm-hmm. And content that will come out of that, I think that will be longer term. And this is very much longer term, is going to be, what is the role of connected cars, and what role does marketing play? That's part of that when cars actually start to interact with other cars. Obviously that's much further down the road. But for me, I just want to make sure that, we're not popping up ads in the most disruptive way for consumers. So I think that is going to be something that we're working on now, but will be what we'll keep working on in the future.
I love that you mentioned influencers. That's fascinating. How are you sort of thinking about influencers?
Yeah, so we've been, and again, I think I really feel that influencers are a way that you can introduce brands, and that's how brand discovery is going to happen, especially with younger consumers. So we've been looking at them at a brand level and looking at macro influencers and then micro influencers, and what are the different roles. And I think it's also, what are the different stories that they can tell in their own voice that will help reinforce what we're wanting to talk about at a brand level.
Yeah, thinking about it at the brand level and building long-term relationships.
Yes, very much so.
That both the influencer and the brand are mutually committed to.
Exactly. That's and that's exactly where we're going for us at Nissan.
Fantastic. Well, I think David, please do come back. I could talk to Allyson forever if you could come.
We can listen to you guys talk forever. I'm not kidding. But that's why we have you guys come back every couple of months to keep the conversation going with our community. So we have no shortage of opportunities in all different formats and form factors. But for now, we really appreciate you sharing with our community. and just taking the time out of your day to be with us. And this was a
Thank you.
fantastic discussion. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks, Allyson.